just one more time. In Scripture, there are points and places where the words are just beautiful. Paul's a preacher, and he speaks as a preacher. He's not a journalist, just give me the facts, ma'am. But he's a preacher, and that last verse, he says, finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. It's been an interesting week for me. As you know, I've been working quite a few nights down at the restaurant behind the bar. And part of at this particular restaurant, because it's a high-end restaurant, a lot of money flowing through the door and so forth, I'm not only pouring drinks, but I'm also selling food, very high-end food, delicious food. And so sometimes the check prices can run very high. And so I had an interesting experience last Sunday night. It's somewhat of a given, at least at our restaurant, at least for now, and at many restaurants, that Sunday night is not always the best night to work. Not a lot of people go out on Sunday night. Think about yourself. Do you usually go out on Sunday night? Sometimes maybe you go out on Sunday night. Generally, you go out on a Friday, maybe a Thursday, definitely a Saturday, but not as many people go out on a Sunday. And so to work on a Sunday night is, And in my case, originally when we started this restaurant, I wasn't a Sunday night bartender. But a couple of the guys really didn't want to work Sunday nights, and so at one point I finally said, hey, I'll give them Sunday night off, and I'll take it if you don't want it that badly. And so I was working it last week, and Simon and I work very, very well together. And I enjoy working with Simon. And Simon and I are there, and I came in, and I was exhausted. I closed the restaurant on Saturday night, and I knew that I was going to be closing on Sunday night, and potentially on Monday night, and potentially on Tuesday night as well. The closing shift behind the bar is difficult, because after the last guest leaves, you've still got another hour and a half or 2 hours of work, just cleaning up and carrying the heavy stuff and so on and so forth. So it's a lot of work. And for those extra 2 hours, if you haven't had a profitable night, you're really not making much money. Because what we do is we take the receipts from the credit cards and we divide it among the bartenders by how many hours you work. Right? So even though I'm working those 2 extra hours, 40% of zero is still zero, right? So my point is closing on a Sunday night is not necessarily the best thing. And so I went to Simon, my good friend, and I said, Simon, I really like Believer. And he said, well, I was thinking we flip a coin. I'm like, no, man. I gave him my shift this Friday. I closed Saturday, and I'm going to close Monday and Tuesday. He's like, come on, man. He says, no. We're going to flip a coin. It's the Democratic thing to do. I'm like, no, Simon, the Democratic thing to do would be to talk it out and vote on it. That's just like chance. I don't know what that is. That's not democracy. He says, no, man, I want to go. And I'm like, fine. So I threw a little hissy fit. I said, fine, you go. He says, well, not if you're going to be that way. I said, come on, man. I said, just go. Finally, I said, you know what, just go. It's totally fine. So I gave up. So I ended up closing Saturday night, Sunday night, and this is where your tears should start flowing for me. I closed Saturday night. I closed Sunday night. And I believe I ended up closing. I was the early guy Monday and closed Tuesday, something like that. Anyways, full week. But Sunday night, and this is one of those, you guys have heard me say it before, if the path is bad and the construction is good, I so wanted to get out of there Sunday night. We have a slow night, we cut him loose, and it's just me. And I have a trainee, and the trainee is actually very, very good. Ryan, he's great. But he doesn't, he was sort of on the floor, sort of at the bar, blah, blah, blah. Well, what ended up happening was Sunday night, we ended up getting a bit of a rush. And in fact, what we ended up getting at our table, we have 12 chairs at the bar, we have 12 seats at the oyster bar, and I ended up getting 3 people right down here at the far end of the bar. And they sat down, in from out of town, and they sat down, and I asked them, can I really something to wet your whistle? And the gentleman looks up at our bar, we have a very large bar, all sorts of great wines and so on and so forth from throughout the world. And he looks up and he says, oh, you have Louis XIII. Well, if you've ever been in a high-end place, or if you know your cognacs, you know that Louis XIII is one of, if not the, finest cognac in all the world. All right? It retails, or it sells at our restaurant at the cost of $150 more expensive than what we charge for Ocetric caviar. It's extremely expensive. He says, oh, you have Louis XIII. I said, yes, we do, and the bottle has been unopened. It is still, we haven't opened it in the month and quarter that we've been open. He says, well, then I'll just have 2 glasses of Louis XIII. So within 30 seconds, his bar tab goes from 0 to $300, and he hasn't even looked at the menu yet. All right, so I'm thinking this could be a good night. So they sit, and I pour the Louis XIII. Now, you need to understand, when you're pouring any sort of brandy or whatever, you've seen a brandy snifter before, the way the smaller ones are constructed is if you put it on a flat surface, all right, tilted sideways on a flat surface, and you pour the liquid in. Okay, so imagine taking a glass and putting it on its side. But because they're sort of rounded, it creates a little sort of bowl or a little scoop. If you pour the liquid in there and keep pouring, right before it's about to spill over the side, that's about 1 ounce with the right size glass. But we have a little bit larger cognac glass. All right? So I'm doing it by eyeballing. I'm not going to let it spill over the side. I'm going to wait until it gets up about close to the edge. Basically what I'm doing is what's called free pouring. I'm free pouring Louis XIII at $150 an ounce. You don't free pour Louis XIII at $150 an ounce. But the thing is, our policy at this particular restaurant is we always try to do a little bit more for our guests. Just not with Louis XIII at $150 an ounce. Well, I overpoured it. I overpoured both of the 2 opening glasses of Louis XIII. And my manager came by and he said, you know, Sven, how much did you pour those glasses? I said, probably 1.5 ounces. Maybe 1 3/4 ounces. Anyway, and he wasn't happy, but he let it go, and that was very gracious of him. And then they had a meal and so on and so forth, and then after they finished their meal, they probably, you know, did another $150 in food or so between the 3 of them. And then one gentleman left, and the 2 are still sitting there, and the gentleman says, you know, I went over and sort of motioned to his glass. After somebody has spent $300 on 2 glasses, you don't say, do you want another one? I mean, that's just greed. But out of graciousness, as a host, you want to offer. So I just motioned to the glass. And, you know, and I was ready to take it away because he finished. He says, no, I'll have 1 more. So this time, I took the bottle of Louis XIII, and I took out the actual little jigger that we poured into to measure an ounce. And I poured as an ounce. And I said to him, you have to excuse me, I have to pour a straight ounce. And, you know, I kind of got chewed out a little bit. And so he says, no, I totally understand. He said, I thought you'd pour that a bit. I said, you know, I'm formerly a bartender out in California, and things are a little different out there. He says, I totally understand. Totally understand. So he was very gracious. Very gracious, right? So what ended up happening then, they were very, very happy. He says, oh, and you know, we always introduce ourselves to our guests and so forth. And he says, Sven, I'm going to be back in town in about 2 weeks. Will you be working on Saturday night? I said, if you're going to be here, I will be. So that's next Saturday night. Anyway, so that came and went. Their tab came up to about $611 for 3 people. And my tip was about $134. That's 21%, 22%. Somebody who knows how to tip. So anyway, so Sunday night, I started the night down, dour, depressed. I ended the night light as a feather. A happy man. In addition to not only them, but the rest of the rush, I walked with a lot of money that night because there were no other bartenders. I had to share with no one. My